On a sunny spring day in 2022, the quiet suburb of Portland, Oregon, was shaken by a horrifying discovery. In one of the neat houses on Maple Street, the body of 45-year-old Robert Peterson was found. The police, arriving at the scene, encountered a tangled story of family relationships, passion, and betrayal. This crime would soon become one of the most talked-about cases in local news, revealing the dark side of an outwardly perfect family life. Robert Peterson was a successful architect known for his innovative, eco-friendly building designs. His career was advancing rapidly, and he frequently appeared in professional publications. At 45 years old, he had already reached significant heights in his field and was a respected member of the local community. 8 years ago, shortly after his divorce from his first wife, Robert met Diana, a 28-year-old aspiring model. Their relationship progressed quickly, and within a year, they were married. Diana soon embraced her role as stepmother to Robert's 13-year-old son, Jack. Jack, now a 20-year-old college student, had always been a quiet and reserved teenager. His parents' divorce had deeply affected him, and he struggled to accept his father's new wife. However, over time, the relationship between Diana and Jack seemed to improve. At first glance, the Peterson family appeared to be the picture of perfection. Robert was a loving father and devoted husband. Diana was an attractive and charismatic woman actively involved in the local community, and Jack was a promising student. Neighbors often saw them together at backyard barbecues or on family walks. However, beneath the facade of a perfect family, complicated and tangled relationships were brewing. Robert, fully immersed in his work, was often away from home, leaving Diana and Jack alone. Diana, whose modeling career had not taken off, spent more time at home, focusing on household chores and trying to find herself in the role of a housewife. Jack, despite his outward calm, continued to wrestle with internal conflict. He struggled with his parents' divorce and had difficulty accepting the new family dynamic. His relationship with his father grew increasingly strained, especially when Robert tried to impose his own vision of Jack's future. In this atmosphere of hidden tension and dissatisfaction, the seeds of a future tragedy began to take root. Diana, feeling increasingly lonely and misunderstood, sought emotional closeness. Jack, caught in a complex transitional phase of his life, harbored mixed feelings toward his young and attractive stepmother. None of the family's neighbors or friends could have guessed the passions that were simmering behind the closed doors of the Peterson home. The events that would soon unfold in this family would shock the public and force many to reconsider their views on family values and human relationships. In the summer of 2021, when Jack turned 19, subtle but fateful changes began occurring in the Peterson family. Robert, who had received a large contract to design an eco-friendly business center in Seattle, started spending even more time away from home. His frequent business trips and late returns from work created a vacuum in the family's life. Diana, who was 36 at the time, increasingly felt lonely and dissatisfied. Her attempts to revive her modeling career had failed, and her social life was limited to occasional meetings with friends and participation in charity events. She began seeking emotional support from Jack, who, in his father's absence, became a closer confidant. Jack, who was going through a difficult phase of growing up and self-discovery, found Diana to be a sympathetic listener. Their conversations, which began as innocent dinner chats, gradually became more personal and intimate. Diana confided in her stepson about her unfulfilled dreams, while Jack shared his struggles at college and his strained relationship with his father. In early autumn, a pivotal moment occurred in their relationship. After another extended absence by Robert, Diana and Jack spent the evening watching a movie together. The wine they drank and the emotional closeness led to an unexpected kiss. Both were shocked by what had happened, but instead of distancing themselves, they felt mutual attraction. From that point on, their relationship quickly intensified. Their encounters became more frequent and intimate. They seized every opportunity to be alone. When Robert stayed late at work, traveled on business, or was occupied with business dinners, Diana and Jack were fully aware of the inappropriateness of their actions, yet they couldn't resist the growing passion between them. Their bond was not just physical. It was rooted in emotional closeness and mutual understanding, something both lacked in their relationships with Robert. Diana saw in Jack not only a young lover but also someone who understood her feelings and ambitions. Jack, in turn, found in Diana not just an attractive woman but a caring figure who filled the emotional void left by his parents' divorce. However, their relationship was clouded by the constant fear of being discovered. Every sound of a car in the driveway, every unexpected call from Robert, sent waves of terror through them. They developed a system of signals and messages to coordinate their meetings and avoid suspicion. The guilt weighed heavily on both of them. Jack felt pangs of conscience for betraying his father, who, despite being busy, had always supported him and provided everything he needed. Diana was tormented by the thought that she was not only violating her marital vows but also betraying the trust of her stepson, for whom she was responsible as a stepmother. Yet, despite their moral struggles, neither Diana nor Jack could find the strength to end the relationship. Their meetings became increasingly risky. They began meeting not only at home but also in remote motels, parks, and even in Diana's car. Each encounter deepened their emotional dependence on one another. By the end of the year, their connection had grown so intense that they began discussing the possibility of a future together. These conversations, while romantic in their minds, were filled with unrealistic plans and illusions. They fantasized about how they would tell Robert everything, how they would start a new life together, without fully considering the real consequences of their actions. Meanwhile, Robert, completely absorbed in his work, failed to notice the changes in his wife's and son's behavior. His rare attempts to reconnect with the family, by organizing a dinner or weekend outing, were met with polite but cold refusals. He chalked it up to normal family challenges and his own busy schedule, never suspecting the true reason for the growing distance between his loved ones. In early 2022, the situation in the Peterson family began to shift rapidly. With Robert finishing his major project in Seattle, he started spending more time at home. He noticed odd behavior from Diana and Jack but initially attributed it to his long absence and the growing distance within the family. Robert's first suspicions arose in February. One evening, he unexpectedly returned home earlier than usual and found Diana and Jack sitting unusually close together in the living room. They quickly distanced themselves when they saw him. Although Robert found their behavior strange, he didn't think much of it at the time. However, his suspicions grew. Robert began to notice how Diana and Jack exchanged glances at the dinner table and how often they were together at home when he returned from work. He also observed changes in their appearance. Diana started taking more care of her looks, and Jack began dressing more stylishly. In March, Robert decided to test his suspicions. He told Diana he was leaving for a conference for several days but secretly stayed in town. That same evening, he returned home and found Diana and Jack in the bedroom together. The scene left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Shocked by what he saw, Robert couldn't contain his emotions. He stormed into the room, yelling and accusing Diana and Jack of betrayal. Caught off guard, Diana tried to defend herself, speaking of her feelings and the lack of understanding from her husband. Jack, stunned and frightened, remained silent, unable to look his father in the eye. The confrontation lasted for hours. Robert demanded explanations, shouting about betrayal and broken trust. Diana, between tears and excuses, tried to explain how she and Jack had grown close during Robert's absence. Jack, recovering from the initial shock, began defending Diana, insisting that their feelings were genuine. That night marked a turning point for the Peterson family. Unable to stay in the same house with his wife and son, Robert left for a hotel. Diana and Jack stayed at home, trying to process what had happened and decide what to do next. In the following days, Robert returned to the house several times, trying to talk to either Diana or Jack. These conversations always ended in arguments. Robert couldn't accept the betrayal of the two people closest to him. Diana insisted on her right to happiness, and Jack was torn between guilt over betraying his father and his attachment to Diana. Neighbors began to notice odd behavior from the Peterson family. They saw Robert coming and going at all hours of the day and heard loud arguments. Rumors about problems in the once-perfect family started spreading around the town. By the end of March, the situation had reached a breaking point. Robert, seeing no other way out, filed for divorce and demanded that Diana immediately leave the house. He also insisted that Jack cut off all contact with his stepmother and move in with his biological mother. These demands triggered a new wave of conflicts. Diana refused to leave, claiming she had equal rights to the house. Jack, now an adult, refused to obey his father's orders and declared his intent to stay with Diana. The situation reached an impasse. Robert, Diana, and Jack found themselves living under the same roof, unable to find a compromise or resolve the conflict peacefully. The tension in the house escalated daily, creating an explosive atmosphere that would ultimately lead to tragedy. April 2022 marked a month of relentless conflict within the Peterson household. Robert, Diana, and Jack continued living under the same roof, but the atmosphere in the house was filled with hostility and tension. Refusing to leave his own home, Robert moved into the guest room, spending most of his time there, only emerging for meals or to go to work. Every encounter with Diana or Jack in the common areas ended in cold silence or yet another argument. Despite their relationship being exposed, Diana and Jack maintained their emotional bond. They often locked themselves in Diana's bedroom, discussing their future and trying to figure out how to navigate the situation. Their conversations sometimes escalated into loud arguments that Robert could hear through the walls. Attempts to resolve the conflict peacefully failed. Robert remained firm in his demands: a divorce from Diana and the complete end of her relationship with Jack. He threatened to cut off all financial support to Diana and use his connections to ruin her reputation in the town. He gave Jack an ultimatum. Either he stopped seeing Diana and returned to his studies, or he would be disinherited and cut off from the family. Diana, on the other hand, refused to leave the house or part ways with Jack. She claimed she had a right to a share of the property and threatened to reveal compromising information about Robert's business dealings if he continued to pressure her. Jack, torn between his love for Diana and his sense of duty to his father, was in constant emotional turmoil. By mid-April, the situation had reached a boiling point. Robert began drinking heavily, making him more aggressive and unpredictable. One night, in a drunken rage, he stormed into Diana and Jack's bedroom, threatening violence. It was only the intervention of neighbors, who heard the shouting, that prevented the situation from escalating into physical harm. After this incident, Diana filed a police report accusing Robert of domestic violence. Although no charges were pressed due to a lack of evidence, this step only intensified the conflict. Feeling cornered, Robert began collecting dirt on Diana and Jack, planning to use it in the upcoming divorce proceedings. Jack, unable to cope with the constant tension, began skipping college classes. His grades plummeted, and he received a warning of potential expulsion. This news fueled yet another conflict between him and his father. At the end of April, another major incident occurred. Robert came home earlier than usual and caught Diana going through documents in his home office. A heated argument ensued, with Robert accusing Diana of trying to steal important business documents. Diana claimed she was looking for evidence of Robert's financial fraud to use in court. The argument turned physical. Jack, hearing the commotion, intervened to defend Diana. In the struggle, all three sustained minor injuries, and Robert's home office was left in shambles. After this altercation, Robert, fearing further accusations of domestic violence, moved into a hotel. However, he continued to come by the house daily, watching the situation unfold and occasionally engaging in verbal altercations with Diana or Jack. Left alone in the house, Diana and Jack began planning for their future. They talked about the possibility of selling the house and moving to another city where they could start a new life together. However, the realization of these plans seemed impossible without Robert's agreement. By the end of April, the situation had reached a breaking point. All three members of the conflict were on the verge of a mental collapse. Robert, having lost sleep and appetite, became increasingly unstable. Diana, fearing for her safety, started carrying pepper spray with her. Jack, unable to see a way out, sank into a deep depression. Tensions rose with each passing day, and it seemed that a dramatic conclusion was inevitable. None of the three could have predicted just how tragic the ending would be. May 1st, 2022, became a day that would forever change the lives of everyone involved in this family drama. The morning started as usual. Robert arrived at the house early, intending to talk to Jack alone. He hoped to convince his son to end his relationship with Diana and return to a normal life. Robert called Jack, asking him to come outside. Jack, exhausted by the constant conflicts, reluctantly agreed. Their conversation started calmly but quickly escalated into another argument. Neighbors walking their dogs could hear the voices of father and son growing louder. Diana, awakened by the noise, looked out the window and saw the emotional scene unfolding between Robert and Jack. Fearing that the situation might spiral out of control, she quickly dressed and went outside. Her appearance only worsened the situation. Seeing Diana, Robert began accusing her of destroying the family and manipulating Jack. Diana, in turn, shouted about years of loneliness and misunderstanding. Jack tried to position himself between them, but his attempts to calm both only fueled the fire. The argument lasted for about an hour, drawing the attention of neighbors. Some even stepped outside, concerned by the shouting. At some point, Robert, unable to contain his anger, grabbed Diana by the arm, attempting to pull her away from Jack. Frightened, Diana pulled out her pepper spray and sprayed it in Robert's face. Blinded and enraged, Robert let go of Diana and stumbled toward his car. Jack, worried about his father's condition, tried to stop him, but Robert pushed him away and got behind the wheel. Despite Diana and Jack's shouts, Robert started the engine and sped off. What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds. Robert, his vision impaired by the pepper spray, lost control of the car. The vehicle veered onto the sidewalk and crashed into a tree just a few meters from where Diana and Jack stood. The impact was so severe that Robert was trapped inside the wrecked car. Jack, recovering from the shock, rushed to the car, desperately trying to help his father. Diana, her hands shaking, dialed 911. Neighbors, who had witnessed the accident, tried to assist, but the car doors were jammed. Paramedics and firefighters arrived at the scene within 10 minutes, but it took them considerable time to free Robert from the crushed vehicle. By the time they managed to pull him out, it was too late. Robert Peterson died at the scene from his injuries. The police, who arrived with the paramedics, immediately cordoned off the area and began questioning witnesses. Diana and Jack, both in shock, were taken to the police station to give statements. The news of Robert Peterson's tragic death quickly spread throughout the town. By the evening, local media were already reporting on the family drama that ended in tragedy. However, the full extent of the conflict and the complexity of the relationships within the Peterson family had yet to be revealed to the public. At the police station, Diana and Jack spent several hours giving their statements. Their accounts of the events leading up to the accident were confused and contradictory. Both were in extreme distress and struggled to coherently describe what had happened. Investigators, after examining the scene and interviewing witnesses, came to a preliminary conclusion that Robert Peterson's death was the result of an accident. However, given the complicated family dynamics and the circumstances leading up to the crash, it was decided that a thorough investigation would be conducted. By the end of this tragic day, Diana and Jack returned to the now empty house, which had been the stage for their family conflict just that morning. Both were devastated and overwhelmed by what had occurred. Guilt, shock, and uncertainty about the future consumed them. Thus ended a day that would forever alter the fates of Diana and Jack Peterson, leaving behind many unresolved questions and an uncertain path ahead. The investigation into Robert Peterson's death began the day after the tragic incident. Detectives Michael Brown and Sarah Johnson were assigned to the case, facing the difficult task of untangling the complicated family dynamics and determining whether the accident was truly accidental. The first step was to re-interview Diana and Jack. This time, having recovered from the initial shock, they were able to provide more detailed statements. Diana described the tense relationship with Robert in recent months, his aggressive behavior and threats. Jack corroborated her story, adding details about his romantic relationship with his stepmother. The detectives were stunned by this revelation, which added a new layer of complexity to the case and made them reconsider the motives of all the individuals involved. Now, they had to determine whether Diana or Jack could have intentionally provoked the accident. The next step was interviewing the neighbors. Many had witnessed the morning argument and the subsequent crash. Their accounts largely aligned with Diana and Jack's version of events, though some details varied. The detectives paid particular attention to the incident with the pepper spray, questioning whether Diana could have foreseen the tragic outcome of her actions. Simultaneously, a forensic examination of Robert's car was conducted. Crime scene investigators meticulously inspected the vehicle for any signs of intentional damage, focusing on the braking system and steering. The results of the examination found no evidence of sabotage. The car was in good working order, which supported the theory of an accidental crash. However, this did not completely clear Diana and Jack of suspicion. A critical aspect of the investigation was examining the Peterson family's financial situation. The detectives requested bank statements, tax returns, and other financial documents, trying to determine if anyone stood to gain financially from Robert's death. Their analysis revealed that Robert was indeed a successful architect with considerable wealth. He had a substantial life insurance policy, with both Diana and Jack listed as beneficiaries. This discovery introduced a potential financial motive for foul play. Further digging uncovered additional significant facts. The detectives learned that shortly before his death, Robert had changed his will, removing Diana as a beneficiary. However, he had not completed the legal process to formalize these changes, which left Diana among the heirs. The detectives also examined phone records and messages exchanged by all involved. They found a series of emotional texts between Diana and Jack, discussing the possibility of starting a new life away from Robert. While there were no direct threats against Robert, the content of the messages raised further questions for the investigators. Diana's past also became a focal point in the investigation. The detectives discovered that before her marriage to Robert, she had faced financial difficulties and had been involved in several unsuccessful relationships. This led them to wonder, had her marriage to Robert been a way to solve her financial problems, and were her ties with Jack an attempt to secure continued wealth? Jack was also scrutinized. The detectives looked into his academic performance, relationships with friends, and past girlfriends. They found that Jack had become increasingly isolated from his peers, devoting most of his time and attention to his relationship with Diana. An important aspect of the investigation involved reviewing Robert's medical records. The detectives discovered that shortly before his death, Robert had seen a doctor complaining of stress and insomnia. His doctor had prescribed him sedatives. This raised a new question. Could Robert have been under the influence of these medications at the time of the crash? By the end of the second week of the investigation, Detectives Brown and Johnson had gathered a significant amount of information. They had witness testimonies, forensic reports, financial records, and medical documents. However, they still lacked a clear picture of what had truly transpired. The central question remained unanswered. Was Robert Peterson's death truly an accident, or was there something more sinister behind it? The detectives knew they had a long way to go before reaching a conclusion, and this case was shaping up to be one of the most complex of their careers. The investigation into Robert Peterson's death continued for 3 months. During that time, Detectives Brown and Johnson gathered extensive evidence, but there was no definitive proof of premeditated murder. After consulting with the district attorney's office, it was decided to charge Diana with involuntary manslaughter and Jack with aiding and abetting. The trial began on September 15, 2022, immediately attracting significant public and media attention. The small county courtroom was packed with journalists and curious onlookers eager for details about the scandalous family drama. Prosecutor David Morrison, in his opening statement, painted a picture of family betrayal and tragedy. He argued that Diana, through her illicit relationship with her stepson, had created a situation that inevitably led to disaster. The use of pepper spray on Robert, according to the prosecution, was not an act of self-defense but a deliberate attempt to cause harm. Diana's attorney, Elizabeth Chun, countered by portraying her client as a victim of domestic abuse and emotional neglect. She claimed that Diana acted in self-defense and could not have foreseen the tragic outcome of her actions. Jack was represented by a young but ambitious lawyer, Mark Taylor. He argued that his client had been manipulated by Diana and should not be held accountable for the events that transpired. Over the course of 3 weeks, the court heard testimony from numerous witnesses. Neighbors spoke of the constant arguments in the Peterson household. Robert's colleagues described him as a workaholic who had recently appeared distracted and irritable. Jack's friends testified about his changed behavior and distancing from his peers. The key moment in the trial came when the defendants themselves took the stand. Diana, struggling to hold back tears, spoke of years of loneliness in her marriage to Robert, his emotional neglect, and outbursts of anger. She admitted to her relationship with Jack, calling it a desperate mistake. Jack, appearing lost and despondent, spoke of his difficult relationship with his father, his guilt over the affair with Diana, and how he never wished harm on his father. Expert witnesses presented conflicting opinions. A psychologist called by the defense testified that Diana showed signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. A forensic expert called by the prosecution argued that using pepper spray so close to the vehicle was an extremely dangerous action. After 3 weeks of testimony, the case was handed over to the jury, who deliberated for 2 days. The jury's verdict was announced on October 10th. Diana was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, with a recommendation for leniency. Jack was acquitted of aiding and abetting but was found guilty of obstruction of justice for initially lying to investigators. Judge Harris, delivering the sentence, acknowledged the complexity of the case and the tragedy it represented for all involved. Diana was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 years. Jack received a 2-year suspended sentence and 200 hours of community service. The sentencing sparked mixed reactions inside and outside the courtroom. Supporters of Diana felt the punishment was too harsh, pointing to the circumstances that led to the tragedy. Friends and colleagues of Robert, on the other hand, believed the sentence was too lenient. As Diana left the courtroom, she appeared broken. Jack, though spared prison time, looked lost and despondent. Both understood that this tragedy had irrevocably changed their lives. The Peterson family case became a subject of public debate, raising questions about the complexities of family relationships, personal responsibility, and the fine line between an accident and a crime. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories that are coming out every day.